The bright lights of the war room made Commander Zara's blue skin shine like polished metal. She stood tall in front of the huge screen that showed thousands of stars and planets. Her long fingers moved across the control panel, making red dots appear where enemy ships had been spotted. The Zilari people were famous across the galaxy for being smart fighters. They had won every big war for 3,000 years. Captain Jake Morrison sat at the round table with other officers from different alien races. He was the only human in the room. His brown hair was getting gray at the sides, and his green eyes looked tired from studying battle reports all night. Humans had only been traveling in space for about 200 years. Most aliens thought they were still too new to understand real war. The savage horde attacked 3 more colonies this week, Zara said in her cold voice. They destroyed everything and took all the supplies. Our computer models show they will attack Sector 5 next. Jake looked at the battle reports on his small screen. Something felt wrong about these attacks. He had seen this kind of pattern before when he was a young soldier fighting wars on Earth. The enemy was not just stealing things. They were learning. Commander, Jake said, raising his hand. I think we need to look at this differently. These attacks are not random. Look at the timing and the places they hit. Zara's 4 eyes turned toward him. Her face showed she was not happy about being interrupted. Captain Morrison, please explain what you mean. Jake stood up and walked to the big screen. He pointed at the red dots showing where attacks happened. See how they hit the communication towers first in each attack? Then they went for the supply depots. But they left the main defenses alone until the very end. This is not how raiders normally fight. Your point? Zara asked, her voice getting colder. They are studying us, Jake said. Each attack teaches them how we respond, how fast our ships arrive, what formations we use, which weapons we fire first. The Horde leader, Grimthek, he is not just a simple barbarian. He is learning our weaknesses. The other officers in the room started talking quietly among themselves. Some nodded, but others looked doubtful. The Zilari had never been wrong about military strategy before. Zara's antenna on top of her head twitched with anger. Captain Morrison, humans have been in space for less time than my grandmother has been alive. The Zilari have been perfecting war tactics since before your people learned to make fire. Our battle computers have studied every possible way this could happen. Jake felt his face get hot, but he kept his voice calm. Commander, with respect, your computers think like you do. They follow rules and logic, but Grimthik does not follow rules. He thinks like a wild animal that is trapped in a corner. When animals are desperate, they do things that no computer can predict. What exactly are you suggesting we do? Zara asked, crossing her arms. Jake pointed to the display again. Change our patterns. Stop using the same formations every time. Move our ships in ways that make no sense to the enemy. Most importantly, we should not put all our best ships in one place. Grimthik is waiting for us to do exactly what we always do. Zara looked at the other officers around the table. Most of them were from alien races that had been fighting wars for thousands of years. They had studied in the best military schools in the galaxy. The idea of ignoring proven tactics because of human intuition seemed crazy to them. The Coalition Defense Force has protocols that have worked for centuries, Zara said firmly. We do not change our methods based on feelings or guesses. We use facts and proven strategies. Jake could see he was losing this argument. He tried one more time. Commander, I have studied Grimthik's background. He was not born into the Horde. He was a slave who fought his way to the top by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone else. He survived by never doing what his enemies expected. If we keep fighting him the same way we fight everyone else, he will destroy us. The room went quiet. Everyone was looking at Zara, waiting for her decision. She had never been wrong about military matters before. Her people trusted her completely. But Jake's words made her feel uncomfortable, like something was crawling under her skin. Thank you for your input, Captain Morrison, Zara said in a voice that made it clear the discussion was over. We will proceed with Standard Coalition Defensive Formation Delta 7. All ships will take their assigned positions. According to the battle plan my staff prepared. Jake felt his heart sink. He had seen this kind of thinking before in human wars. Pride in old ways of fighting that got good soldiers killed. Commander, please reconsider. I know this sounds strange, but sometimes the best way to win is to stop fighting like you are supposed to fight. The decision is made, Zara said, turning back to the display screen. You will prepare your ship for support duties. Stay behind the main battle line and assist with repairs and medical evacuation. Jake knew there was no point in arguing anymore. He had said what he needed to. Say now all he could do was hope he was wrong about what would happen next. But deep in his chest, he felt the cold fear that comes when you know disaster is coming and nobody will listen to your warnings. As the meeting ended, the other officers filed out of the room talking about their assignments. Jake stayed behind, for a moment looking at the battle display. The red dots showing enemy positions seemed to form a pattern that made his stomach feel sick. Lieutenant Amy Carter, his second-in-command, walked up beside him. She was young but smart, with short, blonde hair and sharp blue eyes. Sir, are you really sure about this? The Zilari have never lost a major battle. Maybe their computers know something we do not. Jake turned away from the display and looked at Amy. The problem with never losing is that you forget how to deal with losing. The Zilari have been winning for so long that they cannot imagine being beaten. That kind of thinking makes you weak, even when you are strong. But what if you are wrong? Amy asked. What if their plan works and we look like fools for doubting them? Jake walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at the display one more time. Amy, I've been wrong about a lot of things in my life. I hope I'm wrong about this too. But I have also seen what happens when good people die because their leaders were too proud to listen to warnings. As they left the war room, Jake could not shake the feeling that he had just watched the beginning of a disaster. The Zilari were about to walk into a trap, and their pride would not let them see it coming. All he could do now was prepare his ship and his crew for the worst battle of their lives. Behind them, Zara continued studying the display, confident in her decision. The battle computers had never failed her before. Human intuition was just emotion and guesswork. She would trust in the proven methods that had kept her people safe for thousands of years, but deep in space, Grimthick was also looking at displays showing coalition ship movements, and he was smiling because the enemy was doing exactly what he expected them to do. 3 days after the meeting, alarms started screaming across every coalition ship. Red warning lights flashed in the command centers as sensors picked up hundreds of enemy vessels dropping out of hyperspace. The savage horde had arrived in Sector 5, exactly where Zara's computers said they would attack. Zara stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Starfire, watching the tactical display with confidence. 200 coalition ships were arranged in perfect geometric patterns, just like the textbooks taught. Heavy cruisers formed the center line with smaller destroyers protecting the flanks. Support vessels stayed safely in the rear. Everything looked exactly right? All ships report ready for battle, announced Sub-Commander Vex from his position at the communications console. His green skin was darker than usual, which meant he was excited for the fight. The Mikari people loved showing their battle skills to other races. Excellent, Zara replied, her 4 eyes studying the approaching enemy fleet. The Horde is using their standard attack formation. Our battle computers predicted this perfectly. Begin standard defensive pattern Alpha. The coalition ships moved into position like pieces on a chessboard. Every captain knew exactly where to go and what to do. They had practiced these formations thousands of times. The Zilari military machine was beautiful to watch as it prepared for war, but something felt wrong to Jake as he watched from his position behind the main battle line. The Defiant was a small human ship built for speed rather than heavy fighting. His crew was only 30 people, but they were all experienced fighters who had learned to trust each other completely. Captain, said Lieutenant Amy Carter from the sensor station, the Horde ships are not attacking our strongest points like they usually do. They're spreading out and hitting our communication relays first. Jake felt ice in his stomach. This was exactly what he had warned about. How many relay stations have we lost? 4 so far, sir. And they are using some kind of jamming technology that our computers have never seen before? On the main coalition command frequency, Jake could hear confusion starting to spread. Ship captains were reporting that their communications were being cut off one by one. Orders from the flagship were not getting through to all the vessels. This is not possible, Zara said, staring at her tactical display. Red X marks were appearing where communication stations used to be shown in blue. The Horde has never used advanced jamming before. They are supposed to be simple raiders. Jake switched his ship's communication system to an old emergency frequency that most aliens did not know about. It was something humans had used during their early space wars, before they joined the coalition. Amy, patch me through to Commander Zara on the emergency channel. Sir, that frequency is not approved for official communications, Amy warned. Do it anyway, Jake ordered. A few seconds later, Zara's voice came through with lots of static. Captain Morrison, why are you using an unauthorized frequency? Because it is the only one that still works, Jake replied. Commander, the Horde is not fighting like raiders. They are fighting like they studied your battle plans for months? Every move you make, they already know the countermove. That is impossible, Zara said, but her voice sounded less sure than before. Our battle plans are classified at the highest levels. They did not need to steal your plans, Jake explained as he watched more coalition ships lose communication. With the flagship, they learned your patterns by watching how you responded to their raids. Every time you sent ships to fight them, they studied how you moved, how you communicated, how you thought. Another alarm sounded across the coalition fleet. 3 heavy cruisers in the center formation had just been destroyed by Horde battle, ships that appeared from an unexpected angle. The enemy was not attacking from the front like they were supposed to. They were hitting the coalition fleet from the sides and behind. How did they get behind us? Sub-Commander Vex asked in shock. Our sensors should have detected any flanking movement. Zara's face went pale blue, which meant she was starting to understand how badly wrong things were going. The perfect battle formation that had worked for thousands of years was falling apart in minutes. Enemy ships were appearing in places where the battle computers said no ships could be. All ships, break formation and engage targets of opportunity, Zara ordered. But half her fleet could not hear the command because their communications were jammed. Jake watched in horror as coalition ships continued to follow their original orders, flying into kill zones that the Horde had carefully prepared. The enemy was herding the coalition vessels like sheep, forcing them to move in predictable patterns that made them easy targets. Captain, should we break from our assigned position and help? Amy asked. Not yet, Jake replied, his mind racing. If we move now, we will just become another target. We need to wait and watch. Learn how Grimthick thinks. On the tactical display, Jake could see the real genius of the Horde's attack. They were not just trying to destroy coalition ships. They were destroying the coalition's ability to work together as a team. Without communications, the beautiful formations became death traps. Without coordination, individual ships were being picked off one by one. The Horde leader, Grimthick, was commanding his fleet from a massive ship that looked like it was built from the wreckage of 100 other vessels. It was ugly and crude, but it was also heavily armed and protected by thick armor plating. More importantly, it stayed just out of range of coalition weapons while directing the attack like a conductor leading an orchestra of destruction. Commander Zara, this is Captain Morrison, Jake called over the emergency frequency. You need to order all ships to abandon standard formations immediately. The Horde is using your own tactics against you. Our tactics have worked for 3,000 years, Zara replied, but her voice was shaking now. She could see her fleet being destroyed around her. We cannot just abandon everything we have learned. You can learn new things or you can die with old knowledge, Jake said bluntly. Your choice. But it was already too late for most of the coalition fleet. Ship after ship was being destroyed or disabled. The few vessels that tried to break formation and fight independently were quickly surrounded and overwhelmed. The Horde had planned for everything the coalition might do. Because they had been studying coalition responses for months, Zara watched her beautiful fleet turn into floating wreckage and escape pods. The Starfire was taking heavy damage from multiple horde ships that attacked in perfect coordination. Her bridge officers were calling out damage reports that got worse every minute. Hull breach on Deck 7. Life support failing in sections. 12 through 15, main weapons offline. How many ships do we have left? Zara asked quietly. 17 still fighting, Commander. Maybe 20 more that can still fly but cannot fight. Out of 200 ships, only 37 were still functional. It was the worst military disaster in coalition history. And it had happened in less than 4 hours. Jake's ship was still intact because he had ignored orders and kept moving in random patterns that confused the Horde's targeting systems, but he could not save the rest of the fleet by himself. All he could do was watch as everything Zara had built was torn apart by an enemy who had learned to think 3 steps ahead. "Commander," Jake called over the emergency frequency one last time, "I am transmitting coordinates for a safe zone. Do not use standard evacuation procedures. The Horde knows those patterns too. Follow my lead and maybe some of us can survive." Zara looked around her ruined bridge and made the hardest decision of her life. For the first time in her career, she was going to trust a human's advice. Because her own advice had just gotten most of her people killed. The escape pod shook violently as it flew away from the burning wreckage of the Starfire. Zara held onto her seat as pieces of metal bounced off the small windows. Outside, she could see the remains of her once mighty fleet floating in space like broken toys. Emergency lights blinked red and orange from damaged ships that were trying to send distress signals. 17 other survivors were crammed into the escape pod with her. Sub-Commander Vex sat across from her, holding a bloody cloth against a deep cut on his forehead. His green skin looked gray from shock and pain. Lieutenant Korvax, the youngest officer on her command team, was crying quietly in the corner. He had never seen a real battle before today. "How many ships did we lose?" Zara asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. 163 destroyed, Vex replied in a broken voice. 24 more are so damaged they cannot fight or fly. Only 13 ships escaped with us. Zara closed her 4 eyes and tried not to think about all the people who had died because of her decisions. Thousands of coalition soldiers, pilots, and officers were now floating in space or had been vaporized when their ships exploded. All because she had been too proud to listen to human advice. Through the small window, she could see Jake's ship, the Defiant, still moving through the battlefield. It was the only coalition vessel that seemed to be fighting effectively against the Horde. While her beautiful formations had been torn apart in hours, the small human ship danced between enemy vessels like it was playing a deadly game. "How is he still alive?" whispered Lieutenant Korvax, wiping tears from his eyes. "His ship is so small compared to the Horde battleships." Zara watched the Defiant disappear behind a large piece of floating metal, then suddenly appear on the other side to attack a Horde cruiser. The human ship moved in ways that made no sense according to military textbooks. It changed direction without warning, sped up and slowed down randomly, and attacked from angles that should have been impossible. "He fights like the enemy," Zara said quietly, understanding something important for the first time. "The Horde expects us to move in straight lines and follow patterns. Jake moves like a wild animal. No computer can predict what he will do next because even he does not know." The escape pod's communication system crackled to life. Jake's voice came through clearly, which surprised everyone because the Horde had been jamming all coalition frequencies. "All coalition survivors, this is Captain Morrison on the Defiant. I am using an old human emergency frequency that the Horde jammers cannot block. Listen carefully because your lives depend on following my instructions exactly." Zara grabbed the communication. "Device, Captain Morrison, this is Commander Zara. We are listening." "Commander, I need you to forget everything you learned in military school," Jake said. His voice was calm but urgent. "The Horde has been studying your standard procedures for months. If you use normal evacuation protocols, they will find you and destroy you. You need to move like humans move when we are trying to survive. What do you mean? Zara asked. Stop thinking like a military officer and start thinking like prey that is trying to escape from a predator. Move in directions that make no sense. Change course every few minutes for no reason. Do not go to the nearest safe planet. Do not call for help on normal frequencies. Do everything wrong according to your training. Vex looked confused. But if we do everything wrong, how will Coalition rescue ships find us? Jake's voice carried a bitter laugh. Sub-Commander, there are no Coalition rescue ships coming. The Horde destroyed our communication relays, remember? We are on our own until we can reach a planet with a working transmitter. The terrible truth of their situation hit everyone in the escape pod at the same time. They were alone in space with limited life support, surrounded by enemies who wanted to kill them. The mighty Coalition fleet that was supposed to protect. This entire sector of space was now just wreckage and memories. I am transmitting coordinates for a hiding place, Jake continued. It is inside an asteroid field that Horde ships are too big to enter safely, but you cannot fly there in a straight line. Take a path that makes no sense. Stop and start randomly. Act like you are lost and confused. That sounds insane, Korvax. Sighed, it is insane, Jake agreed. But insane is what keeps you alive when your enemy thinks they know how you think. Grimthick has been winning because he can predict what Coalition forces will do. He cannot predict crazy. Zara looked around at the faces of her surviving crew members. These were highly trained military officers who had spent years learning proper procedures for every situation. Now Human was telling them to throw away everything they had been taught and act like frightened animals, but her proper procedures had just gotten most of her fleet killed. All escape pods, follow Captain Morrison's instructions, Zara ordered. Set random courses toward the coordinates he transmitted. Do not group together. Do not maintain communication. Act like individual survivors, not like a military unit. As their escape pod began moving toward the asteroid field, Zara watched the Defiant continue its impossible dance through the battlefield. Jake was attacking Horde ships with weapons that should not have been powerful enough to hurt them. But he was hitting weak spots that bigger Coalition ships had missed. Engine ports, communication arrays, weapon cooling systems. How does he know where to hit them? Vex asked, watching the same thing. Because he studies his enemies the same way they study him, Zara realized. While we were making perfect battle plans, Jake was learning how Horde ships are built, how they move, how they think. He fights like them, so he knows how to hurt them. A massive explosion lit up space as the Defiant destroyed another Horde cruiser. But there were still dozens of enemy ships, and Jake was just one man with one small ship. Even fighting like a wild animal, he could not win against such numbers. This is hopeless, Korvax said. Even if we reach the asteroid field, what then? We cannot hide forever. The Horde will eventually find us and kill us. Zara did not have a good answer. Their escape pod had enough life support for maybe 2 days. Their communication equipment could not reach any Coalition bases. They had no weapons and no way to call for help. All they could do was hide and hope that someone would come looking for survivors. But as she watched Jake's ship continue to fight against impossible odds, she began to understand something important about humans. They did not give up even when giving up made perfect sense. They kept fighting even when they could not win. And sometimes, their refusal to accept defeat created opportunities that logical thinking could never find. Sub-Commander Vex, she said quietly, when we reach the asteroid field, I want you to study everything Captain Morrison does. How he moves his ship, how he chooses targets, how he thinks about fighting. If we survive this, we are going to need to learn new ways of war. You mean abandon Zalari military doctrine? Vex asked in shock. I mean survive, Zara replied. Our doctrine just got thousands of good people killed. Maybe it is time to learn from someone whose doctrine keeps people alive. The escape pod entered the asteroid field just as another Coalition ship exploded in the distance. Through the rear. Window, Zara could see Grimthic's flagship moving slowly through the wreckage, looking for survivors to destroy. The Horde leader was thorough and patient. He would not leave until he was sure every coalition vessel was eliminated, but he had never fought humans before. And humans, Zara was beginning to understand, had a talent for surviving things that should have killed them. The asteroid field was dark and cold, filled with floating rocks the size of buildings. Zara's escape pod drifted between the massive stones, its engines turned off to avoid detection. Through the thick windows, she could see other coalition escape pods hidden in the shadows. Everyone was following Jake's advice to act crazy and unpredictable. For 6 hours, they waited in silence. The only sounds were the quiet hum of life support systems and the occasional bump when a small rock hit their hull. Lieutenant Korvax had stopped crying, but his hands still shook when he thought nobody was looking. Sub-Commander Vex kept checking his weapon, even though it would be useless against Horde battleships. Then Jake's voice came over the emergency frequency again. All survivors, this is Captain Morrison. The Horde main fleet has moved on to attack the next sector. We have maybe 12 hours before they send scouts back to look for survivors. Time to start learning how to fight back. Zara grabbed the communication device. Captain Morrison, we only have escape pods and a few damaged ships. How can we possibly fight the savage horde? Commander, you are thinking like someone who has big ships and heavy weapons, Jake replied. But we do not have those things anymore. So we need to think like people who are small and weak, but still want to survive. We need to learn guerrilla warfare. What is guerrilla warfare? Korvax asked. Jake's ship appeared from behind a large asteroid, moving slowly toward their hiding place. The Defiant looked beaten up, with scorch marks on its hull and one of its weapon ports damaged. But it was still flying, which was more than most of the coalition fleet could say. Guerrilla warfare is how small groups fight big armies, Jake explained as his ship came closer. You do not try to win big battles. Instead, you hit the enemy when they do not expect it, then disappear before they can hit you back. You make them afraid to travel alone. You attack their supplies and communications. You make them waste time and resources looking for you. The Defiant docked with Zara's escape pod, and Jake came aboard wearing a simple flight suit that looked nothing like the fancy uniforms coalition officers wore. His face was tired and dirty, but his green eyes were sharp and alert. Amy Carter came with him, carrying a bag of equipment. Commander, Jake said, nodding respectfully to Zara. I am sorry about your fleet. Those were good people who did not deserve to die. Zara felt shame burn in her chest. They died because I was too proud to listen to your warnings. Their blood is on my hands. Their blood is on Grimthac's hands, Jake corrected firmly. You made a mistake, but he chose to be a killer. Do not confuse the two things. Right now, we need to focus on making sure no more good people die. Amy spread out a rough map showing the local star systems. She pointed to several planets marked with red symbols. The Horde has supply bases on these worlds. Small outposts with maybe 50 to 100 soldiers each. They store fuel, ammunition, and food for the main fleet. You want us to attack? Military bases with escape pods? Vex asked in disbelief. Not attack, Jake said with a small smile. Raid, hit and run. Take what we need and destroy what we cannot carry. Make them waste ships guarding every little outpost. Force them to spread their forces thin. Jake activated a small hologram projector that showed a Horde supply depot. The building looked like a metal box sitting on a rocky planet with 2 guard towers and a landing pad. A few Horde soldiers walked around the perimeter, but they looked bored and careless. This base has enough supplies to keep a battleship running for months, Jake explained. But it only has 20 guards because the Horde thinks all coalition. Forces in this sector are dead. They are not expecting trouble. How do we get close enough to attack without being detected? Zara asked. We do not use military ships, Amy replied. We use civilian transport vessels that look like refugee ships. The Horde lets refugees pass through their territory because they do not see them as threats. We hide weapons and soldiers inside fake cargo containers. Jake pointed to another part of the map. There are 3 refugee camps in this system, filled with people who escaped when the Horde attacked their worlds. We can blend in with them, get close to the target, then strike fast and disappear. Korvax looked confused. But that sounds like lying and sneaking. That is not honorable warfare. Honor is a luxury for people who have bigger armies than their enemies, Jake said bluntly. When you are outnumbered 100 to 1, survival matters more than honor. Dead heroes cannot protect anyone. Over the next few hours, Jake taught the Coalition survivors how to think like guerrilla fighters. Instead of grand battle plans, he showed them how to make quick raids that would hurt the enemy without risking too many lives. Instead of formal military ranks, he organized them into small teams that could work independently. The most important rule, Jake explained, is that you never fight fair. Fair fights are for people who want to die heroically. We want to live and make the enemy suffer. If they have 10 soldiers, you attack with 20. If they have 20, you attack with 50. If you cannot get more soldiers than them, you do not attack at all. Zara found this way of thinking very difficult. Everything she had learned about warfare emphasized courage, honor, and facing your enemies in open battle. Sneaking around and attacking from hiding seemed cowardly, but then she remembered the burning wreckage of her fleet and the thousands of dead Coalition soldiers. Honor had not saved them. Courage had not protected them. Following the rules had only made them easy targets for an enemy who did not follow any rules. "What about our damaged ships?" Vex asked. "We have a few vessels that can still fly but cannot fight big battles. We turn them into something the enemy will not expect," Amy suggested. "Strip out the heavy weapons and armor. Make them faster and harder to detect. Use them for reconnaissance and hit-and-run attacks on small targets," Jake nodded. "Exactly. The Horde expects Coalition ships to be slow, heavily armed, and easy to track. But if we make our ships fast and sneaky, we can appear anywhere and disappear before they can respond." Lieutenant Korvax was starting to understand. "So instead of trying to destroy their main fleet, we make it impossible for them to supply their main fleet?" "Now you are thinking like a guerrilla," Jake said with approval. "Big armies need lots of supplies. Food, fuel, ammunition, replacement parts. If we can disrupt their supply lines, their big ships become useless hunks of metal floating in space." Zara looked around at her surviving officers. They were all listening carefully to Jake's words, trying to learn this new way of fighting. It felt strange to take military advice from someone her people had considered inferior just a few days ago, but Jake's advice was keeping them alive while her advice had gotten them killed. "How long will this take?" she asked. "How long before we can hurt the Horde enough to make a difference?" Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking carefully. "Commander, this is not about winning one big battle. This is about making the Horde's life so difficult and expensive that they decide to go somewhere else. It might take months or even years. Are you willing to fight that long using methods that go against everything you were taught?" Zara thought about all the people who had trusted her and died because of her pride. She thought about the families who would never see their loved ones again. She thought about other worlds that would suffer if the Horde was not stopped. "Yes," she said firmly. "Teach us how to fight like humans. Teach us how to survive." 6 months had passed since the great battle at Sanctuary Station. Commander Zarathik stood alone in the quiet memorial room of her ship. The walls glowed with soft blue light from thousands of crystal stones. Each stone held the name of a Valonian who died at Nexus Prime. 12 million names. 12 million lives lost because she would not listen. The door opened behind her. Admiral Morrison walked in slowly. His boots made soft sounds on the metal floor. He did not speak right away. He just stood next to her and looked at the wall of crystals. "I come here every day," Zarathik said. Her voice was quiet and sad. "I read their names. I remember their faces. Children who will never grow up. Parents who will never see their families again, all because I was too proud to listen to you." Morrison nodded. He had seen this kind of pain before. "I lost people too, Commander. Whole worlds before we learned how to fight the swarm. The hurt never goes away completely, but it can make you better at protecting others. Through the big window, they could see the new space station being built. Humans and Valonians worked together on it. The station would be called New Nexus. It would be a home for both species and a symbol of their friendship. My people ruled this part of space for 3,000 years, Zarathik continued. We thought we were better than everyone else. We thought our old ways were always right. We thought young species like humans could not teach us anything. I was so wrong. A young human officer came into the room. She carried a computer pad in her hands. Admiral Morrison, Commander Zarathik, the new fighting manual is ready. We have combined Valonian tactics with human tactics, both styles together. Make us much stronger. The manual was more than just battle plans. It showed how two very different ways of thinking could work together. The Valonians were good at making perfect plans. The humans were good at changing those plans when needed. You know what hurts the most? Zarathik asked. If I had listened to you from the start, those 12 million people would still be alive. Instead, I wanted to show that Valonians were better than humans. All I showed was how foolish I was. Morrison put his hand on her shoulder. It was a human gesture of comfort. Pride makes us deaf to good advice, especially advice from people we think are not as good as us. But I learned something in my 40 years as a soldier. Smart ideas can come from anyone. Even from people who have only been in space for 200 years, they stood quietly for a moment. The only sound was the soft hum of the ship's engines. Both leaders thought about the hard lessons they had learned. The swarm is still out there, Zarathik said. Our ships working together have won many battles. But the creatures keep learning new things. They keep getting stronger. That is why we must keep learning too, Morrison replied. Your people are good at following rules and making plans. My people are good at changing and trying new things. Neither of us is complete by ourselves. Zarathik remembered the first time she met Morrison. She had been so sure that humans were simple and weak. She thought their ships were ugly and their tactics were messy. She could not understand how creatures who had only left their home planet 2 centuries ago could have anything to teach the mighty Valonian Empire. Now she knew better. The humans were not simple. They were different. Their chaos was not weakness. It was a different kind of strength. When the swarm learned to beat Valonian order, human disorder confused it. The creatures could not adapt to something that changed every second. I have been thinking about something, Zarathik said. Before the war, I thought strength meant being the biggest and strongest. I thought it meant never asking for help. I thought it meant always knowing the right answer. And now? Morrison asked. Now I think real strength means knowing when you need help. It means listening to others even when they are different from you. It means admitting when you are wrong. A message came through the ship's communication system. Captain Ellen Stone was calling from the construction site. Admiral Morrison, Commander Zarathik, we have a problem. 3 swarm ships have been spotted near the edge of our space. They are not attacking. They are just watching. Morrison and Zarathik looked at each other. The swarm was still learning, still adapting, still trying to find new ways to beat them. We should go to the bridge, Morrison said, as they walked through the corridors of the ship. Zarathik thought about how much things had changed. 6 months ago, the idea of taking orders from a human would have made her angry. Now, she was glad to have Morrison as a partner. On the bridge, they could see the swarm ships on the main screen. The creatures looked like giant insects made of metal and flesh. They moved in slow circles, watching the construction of New Nexus. What do you think they want? Asked Captain Danny Wright, Morrison's second in command. They are studying us, Zarathik said, learning our new tactics, trying to understand how humans and Valonians work together. And then we need to be ready for their next attack, Morrison said. But we also need to keep building. Keep showing them that we will not be scared. Lieutenant Kelly Price came over with a report. Sir, our scouts say the swarm has built new types of ships. They look different from the ones we fought before. Zarathik was not surprised. The swarm always changed, always adapted. That was what made them so dangerous. We will adapt too, she said. Humans and Valonians together. We will change faster than they can learn. Later that day, Zarathik stood in her private quarters looking at a picture of Nexus Prime. The colony had been beautiful once. Green forests and blue oceans. Cities that sparkled like jewels. Now it was a dead rock floating in space. Morrison came to visit her. He brought 2 cups of coffee, a human drink that Zarathik had learned to enjoy. I have been thinking about the memorial, Morrison said. The one we are building on New Nexus. What should we write on it? Zarathik thought for a long moment. We should write the truth. That 12 million people died because their leader was too proud to listen. That pride is dangerous. That wisdom can come from unexpected places. That is a hard truth to put on a memorial, Morrison said. Hard truths are the most important ones, Zarathik replied. If we lie about what happened, we might make the same mistake again. Future leaders need to know the cost of pride. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking their coffee. Outside the window, stars shone in the darkness. Somewhere out there, the swarm was planning its next move. But humans and Velonians would be ready. You know, Morrison said, when I first met you, I thought you were just another arrogant alien leader. I was wrong too. How so? Zarathik asked. You were arrogant, yes, but you were also brave. And when you realized your mistake, you had the courage to change. Not many leaders can do that. Zarathik felt a strange warmth in her chest. It took her a moment to realize it was pride. But this was different from the pride that had gotten her people killed. This was pride in growth, pride in learning, pride in becoming better. The hardest part, she said, is living with the knowledge that those 12 million people did not have to die. If I had been wiser, if I had been more humble, they would still be alive. Yes, Morrison said simply, that is the price you pay. But their deaths were not meaningless if you learned from them. If you use that knowledge to save others, Zarathik nodded. She understood now. The memorial was not just about remembering the dead. It was about remembering the lesson. About making sure that future generations would not repeat her mistakes. The war against the swarm would continue. There would be more battles, more difficult choices. But now humans and Velonians would face them together. Each species bringing their own strengths to the fight. And at the center of it all would be the lesson that Zarathik had learned at such a terrible cost. That sometimes the most important advice comes from the most unexpected places. That pride can be more dangerous than any enemy. That true strength comes not from being the best, but from being wise enough to learn from others. The bitter price had been paid. But from that payment had come something precious. Understanding, alliance, hope. Zarathik would carry the weight of those 12 million deaths for the rest of her life. But she would also carry the wisdom that came from them. And perhaps in the end, that wisdom would save even more lives than were lost. The stars continued to shine in the darkness, and the future remained unwritten.